Hello and welcome to the History of Japan podcast, episode 496. And as we verge up on episode 500, for which, by the way, please do not forget to reach out, send your questions my way. I've had a few really good ones so far, but as a reminder, every 100 episodes, Q&A episode, any topic related to Japanese history or the show, or within reason, pretty much anything, you can ask it. I will do my best to answer it. So get those questions in because we are getting up on the time to do that. But as we approach that milestone, I wanted to do something a little different today. So this is not going to be a traditional scripted episode, and instead it's going to be something kind of related to a question I get asked a lot. I cannot count the number of delightful listener emails I have gotten asking me for travel recommendations while you're in Japan. And here's the thing, everyone. I didn't really do that much traveling in Japan when I was there in school. If you have any friends or family who've been through graduate school, you know that you make pretty crap money doing that. And so you don't really get to do a lot of traveling. I was just in Tokyo doing archival research, and pretty much my life was archives to 7-Eleven for dinner to walking around to the free shrines and temples, which were the only entertainment I could afford, to back to my crappy hotel room. It was not the most exciting life to live. But now, recently, I have finally gotten to take a long-awaited trip to Japan while actually having a big boy job where I get real money, and I can actually do things for fun. And more importantly, I had someone coming along for whom I had to do some programming. I say this show all the time is for interested non-experts, and I had my very own bona fide interested non-expert accompanying me on the trip. Would you like to introduce yourself, interested non-expert?
Yes, hello. I am Demetria Spinrad. I am Isaac's spouse, and I not only am not an expert in Japanese culture or history, I can't speak Japanese. So I was getting a personalized tour, an amazing personalized tour of a lot of Japanese historical sites. But I was also getting the experience of the tourist who was reading the English language explanations at all of those sites. And let me tell you, there was a lot of difference between what Isaac was telling me and the tour experience I would have gotten purely as a tourist who was experiencing what the curators of those sites wanted tourists to see.
Yeah, some places more than others, it is very noticeable that you get things pitched to a Japanese domestic audience and things pitched to Americans or to English speakers. And there's a couple different reasons for that, I think, but we'll get into that. Demetria has very generously agreed to join us for this episode of the podcast. Depending on what you all think of it, there may be another one after this where we talk. I don't think we'll have time to talk about our whole itinerary in our usual 30-minute-ish format. But the way we're going to do this, I think, so I had 10 days to plan this trip out. And in the interest of giving Demetria a taste of as much of the country as possible, we ended up visiting 5 different places. And today I think we're going to talk about 3 of those. And sort of the thought process that went into picking them, impressions, stuff like that. The first of these, of course, the gateway to the country, is the great city of Tokyo itself. So, Demetria, would you like to share your impressions of Tokyo? What stood out? What your kind of memories of the space are?
Complete sensory overwhelm.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
I have been in quite a few cities around the world, and I don't think I've ever been in a city quite like Tokyo. It is just an amazing urban space in a way that is nothing like anything else I have ever experienced before.
Yeah, in terms of mega cities, I mean, in the United States, the only places that come close, I would say, are New York, which is still not as big as Tokyo. I think there's 10 million people living in New York, something like that. Tokyo, the greater metro area, is about 30. And then Los Angeles, which also is not as big. I know it's smaller than New York, but not quite how big. It's got the same level of sprawl, certainly, but not quite the same level of density. So there's really nothing quite like it in the United States. Really, I think, I mean, I haven't spent really any time in Europe. You have more than I. I guess London's also a megacity.
I think technically, but even London doesn't have quite the same level of. There are things that can just work differently when you have that many people living on every single block. Just, finding a place to eat. You walk into a side alley and there are 5 restaurants there. Finding literally anything, it's just a couple blocks away, in a way that places like London, especially, which tend to be very strict with their zoning laws, just do not have anything quite like that.
Yeah, I think really only in Asia do you see that type of incredibly built up megacity with the level of population density that Asia has. Um, so, in terms of general impressions, one of the other things I remember you remarking on a lot in Tokyo is again kind of the nature of the infrastructure, which you kind of alluded to with the density of restaurants. Are there other things about the city that really jumped out to you that surprised you in that way?
Well, I'm obviously very jealous of the train system as someone who lives in a city that has the one train line, which they call the one line, and it's the only line we have.
We're getting another line next year. We're doubling the amount of train lines that we have.
I was also really astonished by how quickly you could go from one of the densest urban areas I've ever been in to full on forest in the middle of the city and back out again. It is just really, really unusual urban planning that's preserved these pockets of these very old historical sites in the middle of a megacity in a way that even European cities, they just I keep saying this, but they just don't work that way.
And I think that's a great kind of entree into what I wanted to do next. So I have done my best from memory, because we did diverge from the script a little bit that I had planned out, to list out every single place that we went to together. We were in Tokyo twice, once at the start of the trip, once at the end of the trip. But for our purposes, we'll just treat this as one consecutive time in Tokyo. And so I'm just going to talk through those. I would love to hear your thoughts about what you remember of those places. I can talk a little bit about why I suggested them, where that's applicable. A few of these we just kind of found on our own. And then I suppose all of you listening at home, especially those of you who have spent more time in Tokyo than I have, can laugh at me, because my idea of what is fun in Tokyo is very, very colored by my background and personal interests. Speaking of which, let's talk about the Imperial Palace. So the very first thing we did in Tokyo was visit the Imperial Palace East Gardens, the part of the grounds that are open to the public, including the ruins of the old Tenshu, the old main tower, back when it was the palace of the Tokugawa shoguns. What do you remember? What were your impressions?
Well, we should say that we actually, not by deliberate planning, this was just complete coincidence. Your school break happened to line up with the tail end of cherry blossom season. So we saw some lovely cherry blossoms there. I'm trying to remember. I remember being struck by the size of the compound, but then the more we talked it over, and this was something that was really not explained in any kind of tourist brochure or on any of the plaques that were around. This was something that Isaac told me. I didn't realize how restricted the emperor was solely to the grounds of the Imperial Palace. It's very impressive as an estate. It's not as impressive as someone's entire world that they're allowed to move around.
Yeah, these days, I mean, of course, legally the emperor can leave the palace grounds, but practically the kind of life of the imperial family is very tightly controlled. There's a very famous anecdote, I think, of Prince Harry, I think it was him, comparing the lives of British and Japanese monarchs and saying he vastly preferred being a British monarch because they had way more kind of independence relative to their Japanese counterparts. And I mean, even this, the part of the grounds we were in isn't really a part of the palace. It's essentially a public park with a tiny little security checkpoint, which I guess is mostly just to, I don't know, make sure you're not a radical who's trying to blow up the imperial court or something.
So yeah, it's a really lovely park. I think it had one of the oldest wooden buildings that we were able to see. I mean, besides, of course, Himeji Castle.
Yes, there's a few old buildings preserved. I believe one of the original Bansho, the guard posts, because where the East Gardens are now used to be the main entrance to the Shogun's palace. So that would be kind of the check-in counter where you're meeting with the Shogun. And I mean, stuff like that is very cool because there's not a lot of the original palace construction left. It was largely ripped down and rebuilt in the 1880s, I believe, and then a few times since then. So it's pretty neat. So the second place we went to, we walked north a little bit, accidentally stumbled into the middle of, I think it was Nihon University's beginning of school year celebrations. So lots of very charming young college people dressed in their finest to kick off the school year. And then we went to a tiny little shrine that I always love to take people to for historical reasons. Don't quote this out of context, which was Yasukuni Shrine, which is, of course, pretty close to the Imperial Palace. And I can talk about why I always take people there, but what do you remember of that?
Oh, the vibe there was weird. Weird vibe. Actually, there was another white tourist who came up to Isaac and asked him how to pray at the shrine. And I just blurted out, I really don't recommend praying at this particular shrine, but he really wanted to know.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to pull... Was it Justin Bieber who got, like, super canceled for praying at Yasukuni Shrine? That's the one thing about Justin Bieber I know.
I'm sorry, I'm not up to date on the latest Justin Bieber news.
On your Bieber gossip. So if you don't know about Yasukuni Shrine, this was a shrine built at the start of the Meiji period, the start of the kind of imperial period in Japan, that commemorates the souls of those who fell in defense of the Japanese nation. Because of the way Japanese laws around religious protection work now, it is independent of the government in the way that, say, like Arlington National Cemetery is not. That's run by the U.S. government in America. And it is run by, to use the technical term, cuckoo bananas right-wing lunatics, who, among other things, have enshrined a series of war criminals convicted during the Tokyo war crimes trials as martyrs for their defense of the Japanese state. That includes people like Tojo Hideki, for example. Also, there's a bunch of Koreans and Taiwanese people who were drafted into the Japanese military and then are enshrined in Yasukuni, which raises some kind of complexities around that because most of them were not volunteers. But yeah, Yasukuni is a weird, basically, monument to Imperial Japan did nothing wrong as an idea, and trying to kind of propagate that vision of history. So what about the vibes weirded you out other than me and that one white guy?
I remember there actually was a little bit in English in various plaques, but it was very focused on things like some art projects. Like I think there were a bunch of different cherry blossom statues around and things like that. I think there was something on the dedication specifically to the Indian judge involved in the war crimes trial, and that was one of the only other things in English. It would be very easy as a tourist to stumble into Yasukuni Shrine and not really understand quite what its place in history was.
Yeah, that's kind of my thing with the shrine. The reason I enjoy taking people there is because, while my Japanese is not fluent, I'm not a native speaker or anything close to that level, I can read it well enough to read the Japanese plaques versus the English one. And oh boy, my friends, they're quite different. The Japanese ones tend to be much more overtly glorifying of Japan's imperial past. The English ones tend to, for example, there's a plaque dedicated to Japanese civilians in Manchuria, in northeastern China, who were captured by the Soviet Union and often, at the end of World War II, and were often mistreated very badly before they returned to Japan. And that is very tragic, do not get me wrong, but the plaque does not mention what they were doing in northeastern China, which was, of course, running a pretty brutal colonial empire. But that's not necessary context for English speakers. And on the Japanese side, of course, it's just kind of treated as a matter of like a patriotic struggle. The people were patriots for the Japanese nation. That's also why, if you're there, there's the Yushukan Museum on the grounds, which is a military museum of Japanese history. I had debated going in with you. I don't recommend it if you are not able to read Japanese, because once again, the one time I went inside, it is very different what they put in English versus what they put in Japanese. And to really understand what's going on there, you need someone with you who is able to give you what the Japanese text is saying and offer some context around that if you don't, if you're not very familiar with it yourself. So we didn't go in there because I always feel a little weird giving them money. There's an admissions fee. And that's kind of my thoughts. If you're thinking about it, if you're very interested in the history, make sure you have someone with you who can help you with that context if you're not able to do it yourself. But it's certainly an option. Right. Any other thoughts you want to share on Yasukuni?
I'd say that you are correct. You told me this ahead of time. The crowd there definitely seems like it skews older.
Yeah, it is very noticeable that there's not a lot of younger folks who are there, which was interesting, especially because we were right next to this start of school celebration where normally at shrines you have a lot of people going and buying you can buy the omamori, the charms, and there are good luck in school or good studying ones. Maybe that's more exam season, but that seems like the kind of thing you'd come grab at the start of a school year, and there's basically all old people instead.
I'm not sure that Yasukuni is the shrine you go to for your good luck on your test charm.
I mean, maybe if you really don't like your teacher. So next up on the tour, and I swear to God that we went to a few places that weren't shrines, but not this time, was Meiji Shrine.
Well, that was the one in basically the middle of the forest.
Yes,
which is the
giant public park, essentially.
Yeah, that one was really, really striking how fast you go from basically close to the center of one of the densest cities in the world into full-on forest. And we were also, again, because we were there during festival season, there were quite a lot of people who were just kind of casually walking around in very traditional outfits because they had, planned to meet up with some friends or take some pictures in the park. So the sort of transition between it's today and it's 100 years ago was very dramatic.
Yeah, it's really a beautiful place to walk through. I mean, even if you have no interest in the actual shrine grounds, it's a beautiful piece of forest just right in the middle of kind of central western Tokyo. And it's really, really cool because of that. There's also a old sort of garden area that belonged to the primary wife of the Meiji Emperor, who is that Empress Shoken? I can never keep them straight. That might be, I think that's Empress Shoken.
I would say that Meiji Shrine was when I first started to notice something that would become kind of a theme of the trip, which was I would read the plaques that were available to me as an English speaker, and then you would tell me about the historical significance of the site. And those were really, really far apart because really a lot of what Meiji Shrine wanted to convey to tourists was the beauty of the area, the selection of, I think it was irises. There's just a massive amount of irises planted there. And then when Isaac started telling me a bit about the history of the Meiji Emperor, and I remember this in particular, he had made a big deal out of bringing wine barrels over to be blessed at the shrine, and that continues to this day. There's still a lot of wine barrels there. And then you told me about some of his alcohol problems. That was something that the staff of Meiji Shrine did not want the tourists to know about. There are a bunch of wine barrels there, and there's no explanation of why the Meiji Emperor brought those over.
Yeah, if you've listened to my biography of the Meiji Emperor, you know that he was a high-functioning alcoholic and other fun little things about his life, which the shrine does not really get at. It's definitely one of the places that creates that myth of Meiji that he's not really even a person. He's essentially just a symbol for kind of the state itself. And kind of the greatness of the birth of modern Japan. He himself doesn't even really factor into that, except as kind of the guy who enabled it in this sort of telling of Japanese history presented by the shrine. He's more of a symbol than a person, which, I mean, I guess is the fate of being the emperor, and you can cry into your palace full of money about that. Any other final thoughts on Meiji Shrine?
I would say I was really excited because I particularly love that Meiji era aesthetic of bringing over not just Western architecture, but that really neoclassical fad of Western architecture and then combining that with Japanese architecture. Ironically, though, I would say most of the things we saw that were direct tributes to the Meiji Emperor did not have that really classic look I associate with the Meiji era.
That's a great point. Yeah, a lot of it is much more traditional. And the most modern you get is maybe like the shrine gates are made in concrete instead of wood or something like that. But that's a very good point. You don't really get that kind of very late 19th century kind of fusion architecture, which is too bad because it also does look cool as hell. After that, we walked a very short distance into one of the busiest shopping areas in all of Tokyo. This was Harajuku. And the big thing we did there, which you found, I did not know this was there, was the Ota Memorial Museum of Art, which is an ukiyo-e museum. So what'd you think? Worth a trip?
Yes, this was so worth a trip. They were actually having an exhibit about cats in woodblock art. And so we saw this amazing exhibit of basically tons and tons and tons of art of cats. And I mean, cats in these kind of comic booky stories where the cat is a character. A lot of cats dressed as kabuki actors. Apparently that was sort of the dogs playing poker of the day. I found that one of the better museums that we went to at putting things in an actual historical context in English. I didn't spend a ton of time feeling like I had no idea what these artifacts were. In a way that I would say some of the museums we saw just wanted you to engage with art and not as a historical object. But I felt like that museum, really good curation. And I'm not just saying that because I love cats.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo all of that. If you have any interest in Japanese art, it is absolutely worth a trip. And it's also right next to Harajuku Station. It's like a 10-minute walk, maybe, if that. So there's no reason to miss it. Just go. It's cool. And there's some nice cafes nearby. Take a walk. Enjoy yourself.
I would say my only disappointment with that one was they had an absolutely amazing print of a woman teasing a cat by putting a bag over its head. And I cannot find that digitized anywhere. I absolutely fell in love with that picture, and it's just nowhere online as far as I can tell.
Yeah, if any of our listeners know how to find that, please shoot it our way so we can get like a giant blow up of it and put it right above like our cat bowls or something. And then we're kind of coming back around to our second trip, where one of the first things we did was go to one of the busiest areas of Tokyo. This was Shibuya and Shibuya Crossing. What'd you think?
Oh my God. I wanted to go because that is the sort of famous, I mean, even I had heard of this area. I wanted to go. About an hour in, I was like, I'm really overwhelmed. I think I've had enough.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot to add here except just if you want to kind of see the most Tokyo thing that you can Tokyo in Tokyo, go to Shibuya Crossing and be like, what hath civilization wrought? And then, yeah, I mean, just take it all in. It's wild. There's so much.
I love the teenage boys who are taking a lot of pleasure in running across the street every time the light changed.
Was that also your first Don Quixote experience? Was that when we went
to... It was.
Yeah.
Yes, that gigantic, again, complete sensory overwhelm. So much light and noise coming from every direction.
Yeah, I don't even know, like, how would you translate the idea of Don Quixote for Americans other than just, it's a store, but that doesn't do it justice. It's like the most extra store in human history.
Yeah.
Go. You should go. There's one in, like, everywhere in Japan. A somewhat chiller shopping experience was over in Asakusa, Nakamise Dori, and Sensoji, the kind of traditional shopping alley with the Buddhist temple next to it. What do you remember of that, I suppose?
Was that the temple that was dedicated to the god of technology?
No, that was in Akihabara. Actually, we should talk about that, though. That's Kanda Myojin Shrine, which I think was one of your favorites, yeah.
I really love that. I was a little shrined out by that point because we went to like 20 different shrines and I was considering skipping that one.
Look.
I'm actually really glad I went though, because I was able to get a one of those. Is it blessing?
Oh, yeah, the Omamori, the charms.
Yeah, I was able to get one out of a vending machine, which I thought was really appropriate for the god of technology. I believe, is that also the one where we saw all of the EBA that had the anime drawings on them?
Yes. I think there's a bunch of anime studios near there, so a lot of the artists come to both kind of show off and put up little the votive tablets, the prayer tablets.
Yeah, there were a lot of prayers that anime that various people were working on was going to do well. So these really amazing drawings by, I presume, the actual animators of shows that they had left at the temple.
Yeah, it's really cool. Among other things, if you're in Akihabara for any reason, it's definitely worth checking out. And honestly, I mean, I always swing by Nakamise Dori and Sensoji, which I think we did in the same day because they're nearby. But they are pretty touristy. I have a fondness for that place because it's like I stayed in the youth hostel nearby the very first time I was ever in Japan. So that specific spot has a lot of intense nostalgia attached to it for me. But unless you're very interested in like touristy shopping, I think it's probably skippable. All right, 2 more shrines, or 1 shrine and 1 temple. Then I promise we're done talking about them. These are the ones that were next to our hotel. Hiei Shrine, the one up on the hill, and the Toyokawa Inari Betsuin, which was the Fox Temple across the street from the hotel.
Oh my gosh, you're gonna have to remind me which one was Hiei Shrine.
Hiei Shrine was the one where we walked up the bunch of steps with the red torii gates on them.
Oh, yes. Okay, so this was something that was really interesting because you also did take me to Fushimi Inari in Kyoto, which is the very famous shrine with all of the red gates. I had not realized that that was kind of a shtick that a lot of Inari shrines do. So if you want to take a bunch of aesthetic pictures at those red shrine gates, don't do it at Fushimi Inari because that's what everybody is doing. Seriously, there are constantly people waiting for other people to get out of their way at Fushimi Inari so that you could take pictures. Just go to Hiei Shrine. It's far less busy. You can get all of the Instagram photos you want there.
It is very true. And it was raining too, so it was very aesthetic because you had the drip coming down a little bit. It was very, very cool. And I mean, that's the neat thing. If you pay attention, you'll notice that a bunch of temples and shrines have Inari shrines on their grounds, like kind of a subsidiary. And it gives you an idea of how popular Inari is as this kind of, god of fortune. That even Hiei Shrine, which has this kind of very central history in Tokyo, still has one of these on its grounds too. The other thing I want to note about Hiei Shrine, there's a collection of swords and armor donated by the Tokugawa shoguns. It's very cool. It's not super accessible. I had to do a lot of translating, and I'm not like a sword guy, so there was a limit on how much I could offer there. But you want to take some cool photos of a sword.
I think they didn't let you take photos.
Oh yeah, no,
you
can't actually take cool photos. You can look at the cool sword and be like, that's a cool sword.
Yeah, they were cool, and a lot of them were dedications to the temple. So there was this really interesting puppet, and then there was absolutely no explanation in English of what the significance of the puppet was, or there was some explanation of who had given it, but really not a lot about what on earth this thing is.
Right, the symbolism of it, which I actually didn't know either, and I don't think the Japanese explained it either. All right, 3 more things about Tokyo. God, there's way more in one of the densest cities we visited than I had budgeted for, now that I think about it. Team Labs. This was not a history site, but it was very cool.
This was something I made Isaac go to. I made Isaac go to a modern art exhibit. Not just any modern art exhibit, but a sensory experience modern art exhibit where you experience the art through all of your body, even through your feet.
It's very cool. You like run around in some water. There's some trippy domes with things projected on them. There's like a little mirror hall. Again, very aesthetic. Lighting is not the best for taking aesthetic photos, but if you're good with cameras, you can probably make it work. And it's just funky and weird and cool. And it's also in an area down by the kind of dock part of Tokyo that I had not really spent much time in. So it was cool to see a different part of the city.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I think they do some things in other parts of the world too. And they're also, I mean, there are lots of different modern art collectives like Meow Wolf who do different experiences all over the world. So you don't have to fly to Tokyo to get a weird experience like that. But if you happen to be in Tokyo and Team Lab still happens to have that exhibit open, definitely worth going to.
Absolutely. And they had one in Osaka, I think, too, which we didn't do because we already had plans to go to this one in Tokyo, but I believe every different one has different weird participatory art. Some of the artist statements were a little kind of up there on butts in that classic artist way of like, oh, your feet in the water is like a metaphor for connected. It's fun to splash around, you know. But it was cool. And then, of course, we have possibly the most disappointing museum we went to, the National Sword Museum, over in the was it Kyogoku area?
Oh man, that one was so bad that we were actually trying to theorize whether it was a tax write-off for the office building it was in.
I strongly suspect it might be. It's very expensive, one of the most expensive admissions prices for any museum we went to. And there's really only one floor of really one room of exhibits. And also it appears to have some weird politics because a lot of it is about the old sword forges of the Imperial Japanese Army. Not so much traditional techniques, but the kind of modern mass-produced gunto, like the military swords. Which is weird. I don't know about that. It's interesting history, but that's not really what most people, I think, are excited about when it comes to sword history.
Yeah, there was a lot of, here's a pile of slag. Here's a type of paddle that is used in the forge. Not actually a ton of swords at the Sword Museum. And yeah, like you said, really not putting the artifacts that were there into the context in which they were created. In a way that I think was a little disingenuous.
Yeah, we took a flyer on that one. It was that or the National Sumo Museum because they're in the same area. And we didn't go to the Sumo Museum, but it has to be better than that. There was a really nice park right next to it, which I believe was donated by one of the Zaibatsu founders. I think it was the guy who founded the Yasuda Zaibatsu. So that's cute if you're in Kyogoku. But yeah, skip the Sword Museum.
Well, I noticed something you left out of your list. General Noki's shrine.
Oh, no, actually, I forgot about that too. But I was going to talk about the Museum of Territory and Sovereignty next.
Oh my God.
These were things I dragged Demetria to during our last literally, I think our last 24 hours in the city. Because I found out we were right next to one of my favorite weird museum ideas I've ever seen, which is the National Museum of Territory and Sovereignty. What did you think of that museum, Demetria?
As much time as I spent performatively complaining about this, it is one of my best stories. It basically what it is it's a series of exhibits on why Japan deserves to have the 3 contested territories it's claiming. What's really interesting is the entire museum is in Japanese, but they actually have QR codes. So if you are a foreign visitor, you can just pull out your phone, download the appropriate PDF, and follow along. What's really interesting to me is that all of them had English available, but then the 3 territories that were contested, so with Russia, with Korea, and with China, only had translations available in that language. So if you're an English speaker, come on in, this whole museum's for you. If for some reason you are a very confused Russian who's wandered in, you only get the pitch about how Japan owns the Sakhalin Island.
It was the Kurils, the Southern Kurils. Yeah.
Wait, which one is
they also
Sakhalin?
used to own Sakhalin. We've been watching Golden Kamuy, so there's some geographic confusion. But yeah, I mean, it's very noticeable for sure. It's very like a passive aggressive making of the case for Japanese ownership of that territory.
It's passive aggressive, but it is also very uniquely Japanese in that each island had its own mascot created by this museum.
Oh,
so
yes,
each island had a cute mascot, like a cute puffin or a cute little baby seal. Isaac is actually holding up the postcard.
Yeah, they gave us swag. I got the postcard.
They were so excited, actually, to have Isaac coming in and to have an American tourist who spoke Japanese. The guy behind the desk there was so excited to talk to you.
Yeah, he was really excited. So it's free admission, and it's run by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I assume he was a foreign affairs bureaucrat whose job is to convince people that Japan owns all these things. And he finally got to make his case to an American, which I think he was very excited about. He was so apologetic when he told me they didn't have a bathroom in the museum.
Yeah, he was actually very anxious because I needed to find a bathroom, and he was really anxious to make sure that we were going to come back and to finish seeing the other exhibits.
Which we did, and I got a nice pen, though it is running out of ink already. So maybe bolster the budget for that part. And yeah, Nogi Shrine. What are your thoughts? And the Nogi house attached to it.
Oh man, that was one of my favorite times of the difference between what was on the plaques, because that was, I think, fairly well signed in English.
Yeah.
And the difference between what was on the plaques for the tourists and what you were telling me about General Nogi, because you gave me the whole spiel about how he couldn't read topographical maps. And let me tell you, Nogi Shrine presents General Nogi as a good general.
Yeah, so if you don't remember the story, Nogi Maresuke was a general in the Imperial Japanese Army. He and his wife committed junshi, suicide, when the Meiji Emperor died to follow him into the afterlife. And the shrine really valorizes him as this patriotic hero, his love of country, the love of the emperor, how he's this kind of model guy. There's a whole statue dedicated to this one time he gave like a little ruffian some money, and that ruffian became like a big businessman. Nogi Maresuke was famously a bit of a moron in real life. As Demetria mentioned, he got a lot of soldiers killed under his command in the Russo-Japanese War because he couldn't read topographical maps, so he ordered them to charge uphill into machine gun fire repeatedly. So not a particularly great dude, but he's conveniently dead, so a lot of right-wingers, right after he died and to this day, have been able to transform him into this sort of patriotic icon. And Nogi Shrine's a big part of that. The shrine was built by essentially right-wing political groups seeking to kind of valorize him. But there is still an Inari Shrine on the grounds, which I bet is older than Nogi Shrine itself.
I should say also, a lot of these things Isaac took me to specifically because they are free. I don't think he would have paid money to, for instance, take me to Nogi Shrine.
Yeah, no, I don't. Pretty much every shrine, unless it's like a really old heritage site, is free to go on the grounds. And like a couple temples also charge admissions, but not many. And so you can always usually get on there for free and look around. And like I said, that was a lot of my experience of Tokyo back when I had no money, which I think did somewhat color the itinerary. So thank you, Demetria, for patiently dealing with that.
Yeah, we're not exactly handing a bunch of money over to right-wingers for the pleasure of going to Yasukuni or anything like that.
Yeah, those grounds are free, and you can make fun of the bad plaques for free there. That took a lot longer than I expected. Do we want to quickly talk about Himeji Castle and then call it a day?
Oh, man. We kind of had two Himeji Castle experiences.
That is true. So, yeah, the next place we went after Tokyo was Himeji on the Shinkansen. The only reason we went was Himeji Castle. There's not a lot else in the town of Himeji. Let's quickly talk about it. Our OG Himeji experience. What was that like for you?
So that I felt like was one of the best curated in terms of making sure that foreign tourists understood the historical significance of the castle. They also did a really good job of laying out things like castle life. The artifacts that are displayed, I think, did a pretty good job of explaining who was living in the castle and why. They even had a couple of kind of dioramas of people so you could see how a room might be set up in the castle. And they did a really good job of talking about castle restorations, because the restoration of the castle, which was quite a process because it is a massive wooden structure that is held up by these gigantic wooden support beams that were rotting out. they did a good job of explaining why in the 60s it suddenly became a priority to preserve those buildings. So I thought, in terms of making sure that tourists understood the history, I would say that Himeji Castle was really above and beyond the best place.
Yeah, in terms of curation, I think it was the strongest historical site we visited by a pretty wide margin for all the reasons Demetria said. That was my first time going to Himeji. I'd never had a chance before, and it was awesome. I'm really glad we did. If you have any interest in kind of the history of the samurai class, in Japanese castles or architecture history, Himeji does an amazing job presenting this, I think, in a really digestible way. And it's not that hard to get to. Not a particularly long train ride from Osaka. It's an hour by the regular train, less by the bullet train. So I would recommend checking it out if you can. And there's, again, not a lot else in Himeji, so it really is doable in a day, and sometimes in a night too, right?
Yes, we got an extra special experience at Himeji Castle because while we were there during the day, I noticed these posters, which are actually all in Japanese, no English on them at all. And I asked Isaac to read them. And it turns out there was an event happening that night.
Yes. So for cherry blossom season, the town of Himeji works with the heritage site, which is kind of the incorporated museum entity that runs the grounds of the castle. And they basically do like a cherry blossoms in the park type of thing. There's a public park in the front of the castle, and then kind of some garden grounds on the castle itself. And they convert these up to have a bunch of lights in them. They literally dropped a grand piano in there and had a guy playing it. And the castle hired a bunch of reenactors to wander around under the cherry trees in samurai armor and pose dramatically under them. And you can pay a little bit extra to go in there and just kind of take in the vibes. It's incredibly beautiful. I mean, the combination of the lighting, the castle, which is backlit with floodlights in the background, the sort of general ambiance, even the piano player was quite good. It was just really cool.
Yeah, that was really, really fun. You worked at a historical site. That was one of your first jobs. So you know that it's pretty common for historical sites to have sort of a nighttime light festival at some point during the year. But I would say Himeji Castle, above and beyond, just absolutely gorgeous, amazing experience.
That was way better than the ones we did.
The guys who were dressed up as samurai, or a lot of the staff were dressed up as gate guards too. We're having such a good time.
Oh yeah, they were really hamming it up. It was great.
Oh yeah, it was incredible. It was just a fantastic experience of not trying to be, colonial Williamsburg hyper realistic or anything. There was a bunch of, there was a baby grand in the middle of the castle courtyard, but just being a very fun experience and a way to experience this absolutely stunning building in just incredible. It's a massive. How many stories is it?
5, I think. The main keep is 5 stories, and it's up on a hill too.
Mm-hmm. And unlike some of the more ornate castles we saw, it is just completely white. So when you light it up with floodlights, it looks like it's glowing, and just very, very dramatic.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I think it's also a theme that you notice when you go to Japan. There's not a lot of worry about hyper accuracy outside of specific circumstances. No one was complaining that there was a grand piano in this traditional courtyard or whatever. No one was making sure that all of the guys dressed as samurai were wearing the clan emblems for the various clans that ran Himeji. It's more about making the experience fun, and I think they do a really good job of making it fun. If you are in Japan, go to Himeji Castle if you've never been. Possibly go again if you have been. And if you are planning on going during cherry blossom season, make a point of going to Himeji, is my recommendation.
It looked like they also had an autumn festival, so they might do that a few times a year, which I think they absolutely should because they really know how to put on a show.
For a lot of historic sites, stuff like that is the big moneymaker, so I'd imagine you're probably right. So that gets us through 2 of our destinations. We have 3 more, the kind of tourist triangle of Osaka, Nara, and Kyoto. But depending on how you all like this, if you find it interesting, we'll probably do those next week. So drop a line to us, put something in the comments, let us know what you think of this approach. Hopefully it helps you think a little bit about planning if you're thinking about going to Japan, or if you've been before, it gives you maybe a different perspective on some things to check out. Think of all the shrines you could go to and critique their curation of their history. There's so many. I cut quite a few shrines. I just want to put that out there.
Thank you very much for cutting a few shrines. I was trying to encourage Isaac. I mean, it's cherry blossom season. There are a lot of seasonal events. We have to go with the flow a little more. And we did find some things, especially in Kyoto, that I don't think we would have found if we had been going off the strict itinerary.
That is true. Another cool thing about Japan, because it's so dense, you can just wander around and find stuff. And we'll talk more about that next time. But for now, that's all for this week. Thank you very much for listening. This show is a part of the Facing Backwards podcast network, and you can find out more about this show and our other shows at facingbackward.com. You can also support the network at patreon.com/facingbackward, with a special thanks to those who have given at our shout-out tier. They are Jan Leonard, Stephen Elkins, Martin Oliveira, Clark Canning, Ian Kellett, Matt Haynes, Jackie Frostocker, Monkey Sack, Alayla McCulloch, Karen Murphy, Peter Wales, Robert Prine, William Arno, Jonas Brandis, Nicholas Kroll, Jerry Spinrad, Jared Stevens, Jeffrey Dwork, Stefan Rushka, Joshua Kane, Robbie and Kat, Jacob Key, Aaron Finkbeiner, and Anonymous Anna's Hummingbird, Mark Sai, Gil, Shimao Toshio's History of Japonesia podcast, A House is a Perfectly Cromulent Mascot, The Fish I Catch Are Rhodes Scholars compared to Samuel Alito, Schmuck, and finally, Everything Changed when the Fire Nation attacked. One day I will be able to do that from memory, but not quite yet.
Unless people keep adding to it.
Oh, God. I mean, I love you all patrons. Please keep adding to it. But also, it's a lot. I'm trying to get it all down so I can do it clean. Until next time, folks, thank you for listening, and good night.